Welcome, everybody. My name is Eric Moody. I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation at the Wyoming Institute for Disabilities, which is the USED for Wyoming. And I'm also the Treasurer for the Collaborative for Faith and Disability. This is a webinar called COVID-19, Faith, Community Responses and Resources for People with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities and Their Families. It's a pleasure to have three great presenters with us. I'm going to introduce them shortly, but before I do, I wanted to just make a few announcements. Here they are. First of all, the Collaborative for Faith and Disabilities is an organization with a wide range of membership, many USEDs and LENS and other organizations as well, dedicated to supporting people with disabilities and their families as they go through this journey of life in their spiritual lives in particular. And there are a lot of USEDs that have contributed to this and LENS, and this isn't even a complete list. So if you're interested in being a part of this organization, please let us know. Just a few important notes. We are going to be recording this session, and the recording is going to be posted on the Collaborative for Faith and Disability website shortly after we conclude. We're going to be posting the slides as well at the same site. You can use the chat function throughout this webinar. I'll be monitoring it, and we'll save questions for the end, and we'll read the questions that come up to our presenters. And so just so you know, the chat function is, if you use your mouse over the window, it should pop up at the bottom there, and it's got a bunch of different options, including muting, stopping your video, and then the chat function as well. The other thing I would mention is please be sure to mute while you're not speaking. Yes, we'll be reading the questions. And our presenters are going to have a fairly short time to be presenting, but we will have some time for questions as well as upcoming webinars at the end. So with that, I want to briefly introduce our presenters and turn it over to them. We've got three great people talking with us today. First is Cristina Gangemi. I think I said that right. Great. Yeah. She's a practicing theologian in the field of disability and theology and directs an independent consultancy, advising the Bishop of England and Wales and also two pontifical councils as well, and is the author of the book Because I Am, Accompanying the Unborn Child and Their Parents with a Pre-Birth Diagnosis of Disability.
Have you had breakfast yet? No. I want cereal.
Next, I've got Keith Dow, Manager of Organizational and Spiritual Life at Christian Horizons, which is an organization based in, I think you said Toronto? No, Ottawa.
I'm in Ottawa. The main base is out of Kitchener, but throughout Ontario and Saskatchewan and then around the world.
Great. And is part of the core council for the Institute for Theology and Disability. And then last, we've got Shelly Christensen, who's a speaker, author, and consultant, committed to supporting people with disability, mental health, and has over 20 years of experience supporting individuals with disabilities, mostly in the Jewish community, and is the author of the book From Longing to Belonging, a practical guide to including people with disabilities and mental health conditions in your community. And she's the co-founder of the Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month, which I think you said has just had its 11th year of celebration.
That is correct, yes.
Great. So I'm going to turn it over first to Cristina.
I have to own up to something. I don't have a PhD yet, a master's degree in disability theology. And you've already introduced me, so it's really lovely to be here. I work as a practical theologian, working in the care service, in churches, faith communities. And I think if I were to explain my job, apart from being a jack of all trades, I would say that my task is to turn theory into practice and to bring the experience of practice to be reflected on and to inform theory. So I think that sort of explains me, and my organisation is just a very small independent consultancy, and we just allow God's Spirit to blow us where it will, and we do whatever we're called to do. So I think that explains us very well. And I hope it will, as we move forward, it will become clearer. So thank you. Could you push the next slide, please? So it's really lovely to be here and to share with you what we've been doing during the COVID crisis. I've come to talk about really a section of my website that I've put up. It's called Space. And just before we begin, to explain what that is, just to keep this idea of space as being a sacred place for accessible communications, community and empathy. And I hope that as we move forward, it will just explain itself out a little bit more, and that idea of space will become easily recognisable and understood. So thank you. Next slide. So in my work and in my life, I try to live in the world from a shared perspective where I can. I think I've been 30 years working in the field of disability. I started in education and then moved into the realm of faith and spirituality, which opened up a whole new sphere of understanding. But I've always had great difficulty with this term learning difficulty, or the label learning difficulty. When I worked in special school, I worked with lots of incredibly creative children that had anything but a learning difficulty. With the right materials and with the intellectual boundaries removed that stopped them from learning, I found that they became very creative communicators and creative learners. I met lots of people along the way that had great teaching difficulty, but the term learning difficulty never really seemed to fit with me. So I've always tried to promote this understanding of everything I do is about providing access or engaging in the stories of creative communicators. And so therefore, in this presentation, you'll hear me say that quite a bit. And I wondered if, as I've travelled through these 30 years, if actually the teaching difficulty is one of the reasons why people who are creative communicators are overlooked, left or squeezed out. And as I was here at the beginning of February in Italy, I'm studying in Italy on and off. COVID hit Italy, and it hit Italy before everybody else. And I can remember thinking to myself, well, what is that? What's happening? And surely it's nothing bad. You know, it will just blow over. Everybody's making a fuss over nothing. So all the things that most of us said. But as I watched COVID take over Italy, and especially move into churches closing down and residential homes becoming very nervous about their staff, and I watched the world close in, if you like, I actually began to see the church move online. It was a real experience where the government in Italy was saying, stay indoors, you don't go out. The churches were beginning to say, stay indoors, you can't go out. It's important to stay at home. It's better not to go to church. And there was a real sense of anxiety that came over me. Next slide, thank you. So one of the things that I've been looking at for a long time now is the whole concept of quality of life, points and assessment criteria for people who are in social care. And I've noticed, and so very much in Brian Brock's latest book, that there's this sort of eugenic outlook, if you like, that's never really gone away surrounding the lives of people with disabilities. And I began to worry terribly that a eugenic outlook could deny people whom I work with, people who I know and who I love and who are my friends, from being hospitalised, and the title, the label frail or vulnerable, whilst it helped them to be protected, actually it put them into a sort of like a very difficult group who were in danger of dying, who were in real danger of being infected. My main concerns I was feeling, what am I facing? Am I going to die? Will I get help? Am I worth going to the hospital? And I began to think about all of the people with whom I work, who were creative communicators, that could be asking those same questions. And if they're asking those questions that were overwhelming me in lockdown Rome, I couldn't imagine what would be happening in the residential homes that those of us that work in the field probably couldn't get to, and staff were not prepared for. Certainly in England, I don't find that they're prepared for the sort of questions. But it was clear to me that at no point as the church moved online, it was absolutely obvious that people with intellectual disabilities, creative communicators, were being squeezed out yet again. Because we were at the beginning, I was watching as lots and lots of material began to come online, because we were a week or two away from Easter, but there was nothing that would enable the creative communicator to animate their spirit, and it became an urgent call. And I bombarded Bill for a few days. Next slide, please. So working with Baroness Sheila Hollins from Books Beyond Words, the founder of Books Beyond Words, and Narayani Tafri-Winye, who is an absolute genius and expert in the field of palliative care, I tried to write something, but I was so completely overwhelmed that it was almost too much to even begin to think what care staff had to do. So working with them and leaving the expertise to them about guidelines for people in care and people in churches, I began to contemplate. And all the time I set to I'm quite Carmelite in my spirituality. So I began to contemplate, but as I contemplated, the internet became even more alive with faith. Lists, guidelines, many of the documents were at degree level. There was so much information coming out. There was information about people with autism, about COVID. They started to bring out different easy reads, but there was nothing that explained what was going to happen or helped people to enter into those real existential questions that I said had formed my own thinking and worried me so much. So there was no time to contemplate, it was time for action. And then slowly, as we began, the Carmelites, the Bishops' Conference in Italy, NCPD, All Belongs, and Masters and other groups began to start putting material up, and that was most welcome. But it was certainly time for action. Thank you. Next slide. So I decided to use this section of my website and make it into something that was immediately accessible. And my main drivers, other than my own learning, my doctoral studies on Edith Stein, was an urgent need to make space, a place where people could practice faith and where we could believe together, where we could be together even though we were apart. And so therefore I started to think about and plan for how to answer those existential questions and how faith motivated questions might arrive. I engaged with a group, a fabulous group in London who I've worked with before, who've done lots of liturgy and prayer for us for conferences, and asked them what we should be doing and if they could help us with providing insights in prayer. And then I began to use the experience I had in special education to develop and process and make resources that would help people when they were sick, if they died, if they were missing people, or if they had questions about COVID, or indeed if they had questions about going to church. The last thing I wanted was that a person would feel that they were not welcome in the physical church, but also not welcome in the online church. So there needed to be space where we could be together, even though we were apart. Thank you. Next slide. So I began to make resources. Some of them you can see on the slide here. And then this fabulous program called Imprint 3, I began to make the resources and then put them online. And we created a website, needs improving still, but it provided immediate access. And I realized that what I've learned most of all from making an area of a website available in a time of crisis is that immediate access affirms that the person's story is as important as anyone else's, and that we need to use less words. Families and individuals need something to do and creative resources to help them structure their day, timetable, music. They need help to breathe, to walk. And we needed an effective way really to help people share about God and COVID and ask questions about death and about God himself. We even have created a piece of music which helps somebody who has COVID and who may be on the spectrum of autism or just is struggling with breathing to actually breathe with the music. So the music encourages the person to breathe in a certain pattern, but then if that breathing stops and they become part of God's breath, that they have the music playing so that as they breathe out, God breathes them in. It was really important to make resources to help people if they went to hospital who didn't understand the virus, and we worked with partners and shared links for that. There was a story of a young girl with Down syndrome in England who was 3 weeks in hospital on her own, communicating with nobody, and she died alone and confused. So that happened yesterday. So next slide, please, almost done. So it was quite amazing what happened. We asked the Hand in Hand group and my cousin and special needs people that I work with and Makaton trainers and tutors for help, and everybody stepped up. But what was really amazing was that I rang the Hand in Hand group and I said, can you tell me the Easter story, please? And just together over the phone, four of them, who you see in the slides here, they told each other the story. The young girl in pink, she wrote the story of Easter, and then everybody went on their phone and acted. And what I realized was that actually we were witnessing hermeneutics that was alive and immediately at hand. A phone call led to liturgies that were shared all over the world. They read out the Easter story, divided the roles amongst themselves. And this gave me evidence, not of people with a learning difficulty, but creative communicators who were absolutely full of faith and absolutely able to share their faith. And as we witnessed, as we went through the Easter season, we went through the Triduum on Facebook, we practiced our faith by watching, singing, signing, listening, and Facebook became our conversation space. But that needs to grow more. I think that it was really very powerful. But they were incredible creative communicators. Next slide, thank you. So on this slide, I'm not going to go through all of that. They're just some links that lead you to various things that I did. I did some outreach to get the word out, because that's very challenging. And as I said before, we drew on the skills of all the people we knew. And it was like living Luke 14 in the scriptures. It was like, go and get out there and call everybody and invite everybody to the feast, because everybody's welcome. And we were so touched because we did on Maundy Thursday a time of watching and reflection. And one young man sent in a video of himself playing and signing and sent us some symbols in. So it became a really, truly sacred space. Thank you. Next slide. So what have I learnt? We've only just begun. I've learnt that the challenges that continue to exist in the field of disability is that there are no funds available to us when there's lots of money made for hypercognitive activities, that there's not enough commitment in the wider church to engage with creative communicators, and that it's really very busy, that lots of expectations are built when you begin to do things, there's still so much to do. We still need volunteers, but most of all, we need commitment. And I've learned that making space means trust, belief, and openness to God's expression through others. It's about being sent to ministry and hope. And I feel that I was like the blind man who spent time with Jesus, and who, after spending time with him, entered into a whole new world and was pointed to a river and was sent to do something. And I feel that that's what we were sent to do. Next slide. So that's it. I believe I've always said this, anytime I've ever done a presentation in schools or hospitals, it's time, it's time for change. But what's absolutely amazing, that blows me away all the time, is that we're the ones to do it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Christina. And now we're going to switch over to Keith. So people, if you do have questions in the meantime, go ahead and hang on to them or put them in chat, and then again, we'll have an opportunity at the end to address those. So Keith, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Eric. Yeah, it's a real honor to be a part of this conversation. Thanks to everybody who's joined us for this. So just a quick recap. I'm manager of organizational and spiritual life with Christian Horizons. So we're a large faith-based organization serving people primarily with intellectual and developmental disabilities, both in Ontario, Saskatchewan, and then in several countries around the world. So manager of organizational and spiritual life, it's kind of hard to tell exactly what that means. Typically, it involves being somewhat of a practical theologian with Christian Horizons, thinking through what does it mean to be a faith-based organization working in the public sector. How do our faith roots influence what we do? Accompanying people through grief and loss as a part of a pastoral team, and working with churches as well to think about what does it mean to become more accessible, to welcome everybody into our spaces. So that's typically what it means. Lately, it's meant all hands on the deck in terms of responding to COVID-19. And so that's involved a bit of a shift for me, more around resources and equipping both internally and externally. But even through that, and I hope to touch on it today a little bit, hopefully our faith roots are able to shine through kind of in the way that we respond to times of crisis, to times of stress as well. And so that's why I've titled my talk today, Faithfully Responding to COVID-19. And I'm almost tempted to add a question mark after that, because at the end of the day, it's not up to us in terms of whether we've responded faithfully, but up to God. And so we rely on his grace for that as well. So you can go to the next slide here. So I want to start with maybe a bit of a disclaimer in terms of, as a large social service organization, we have our plans, we have our strategies, and we're excited about what we're going to do next. And then all of a sudden, something like COVID-19 happens. And I mean, in the best of times, we're kind of working within our resources, what's available to us, and trying to make the most of that. So you can imagine when coronavirus hits, to swing an organization of close to 4,000 employees, for instance, in a whole new direction is quite a challenge. And so I don't want to pretend here that we have it all together and all figured out. It's really a cause for humility. And I think in each of our roles, we've recognized whatever I was doing, I may need to put that aside and really focus on what's come up and what's at hand and how do we work together on these types of things going forward. And so just to describe the picture here, there's a person who we support who's accompanied by a direct support professional following at an appropriate physical distancing. So I know we use the word unprecedented a lot in terms of this crisis. As we look back over human history, it's not technically unprecedented. This is something that happens every so often, but certainly in our own experience, like I say, it's not something that we expected to happen. And most of the agencies, most of the organizations serving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are really grappling with what does it look like to respond well? What does it look like to provide the best services and support possible? And being a faith-based agency doesn't give us an upper hand in that sense. It's not like God sent us a warning ahead of everybody else. Here's how you can be prepared. Here are the health and safety policies you need to have in place. But my hope is, and I'm going to end the session with a verse. My hope is that we can respond in a way that is gracious, that isn't fearful, one that walks through these paths of the shadow of death, almost, as we're talking about, with a kind of peace, right? And so that's my hope, that's my prayer. It really is a time for advocacy as well. I think Cristina spoke to some of those aspects. So you both have a time when we're scrambling to put together resources, but also a time when the media is just full of information, and some of it is good and helpful, and some of it not so much. Some of it maybe upholds and celebrates the lives of people with disabilities, and let's be honest, a lot of it does not. And so if you want to move to the next slide here, I just have a screen clip from one of the things that World Health Organization shared on Twitter. And I think there is some helpful information out there, but because we're all so overloaded so much of the time, it's difficult for that to come to the surface. And so again, part of it is creating these resources, thinking through what do people need, and then part of it is finding a way to cut through the noise to advocate on behalf of people with intellectual disabilities and their families or other types of disabilities. And so what I found helpful about this this tweet, and there's a whole kind of thread there that I encourage you to look at as well. I'll read through kind of what it touches on here, but it talks about people with disability being at greater risk of contracting coronavirus because of things like physical barriers to access hygiene facilities, the need to touch things, difficulty in enacting social distancing, and difficulty accessing information. And what I appreciated about their approach here is that it taps into the social model of disability, recognizing that it's not necessarily intrinsic health challenges that people are facing, but so much of the ableism, so much of the challenges that people face are due to whether it's secondary factors or the built environment or the people who are coming around them, and often best intended people too. You think about the necessity for personal care and just the added risks that can bring into people's lives as well. So recognizing that we all have a part to play in kind of confronting some of the challenges that our society presents. And we'll touch more on that, especially as it relates to information for people with intellectual or developmental disabilities and their families. So you can move on to the next slide here. Yeah, so I talked a little bit about the information overload that we face, and Cristina touched on that as well. How do we advocate in a time of ceaseless information? So if you want to push forward, one example here is the stories that we share. And honestly, the people that we support, no matter what we're going through, bring incredible stories of resilience, incredible stories of how they carry on with their lives and continue to make friendships and connect with their neighbors despite many challenges. And so this is just a screen clip again of our Facebook post. You can find us on Facebook at Friend of CH or at Twitter at C Horizons. But this is Karen, and I know that Karen's been trending on Twitter for other reasons lately, but Karen here is really excited about her banana bread. And this is just one, obviously just one small example, but her quote here is, "This corona is not going to get me down. I'm baking banana bread." So stories are just such a great way to connect with the lives of people who are actually going through this, and to be able to connect with them in a very human way, which is so exciting and I think so relatable as well. The next example here, and you can move forward, is around faith. And so Christine mentioned Easter as well, time in the Christian tradition where we celebrate the Christ rising from the dead. And so just being mindful and intentional about how do we continue to represent our faith roots well through this time, that it's not just about responding to a crisis, it's about responding to a crisis in a certain way. And so this is just one example of how we seek to do that to bring in the unique influences of our faith. And for us, it's coming from the Christian tradition. We serve people from a variety of religious backgrounds, and we have employees from a variety of religious backgrounds as well. So we just want to be discerning in the way that we do that, and look for the real contribution of spirituality and faith to this time. And then finally, you can move forward again, just around resources. So as we're talking about information, there is a lot of unique information that is needed through this time. If you want to go to the next slide, I'll give a few examples of that. This is from the page christian-horizons.org/coronavirus. And the first, you can push forward here, is grief and loss. So as an organization, I mentioned my own role in kind of a pastoral capacity, but we do accompany people through grief and loss, whether that's the loss of a loved one or accompanying employees as they've lost somebody who they support, or families, whatever it is. So we have some unique resources. We worked with hospice in Peterborough to create some great resources around this. Typically, they would be internal, that we would be going in and working with teams, working with people we support. But through this time, we want to make some of that available for the wider audience. We know so many people are wrestling with different aspects of grief and loss to this time in a very unique way. The next one here is around sector resources. And so just a screen clip of a flow chart. There's so much going on behind the scenes, again, as agencies, as organizations are scrambling to respond in a way that really promotes health and safety and value for people who use our services. And so we've been privileged to be part of a really collaborative movement here in Ontario, whether it's with Community Living or L'Arche or other organizations, that we know everyone is going through this. And so part of that is recognizing that we can come alongside each other, we can share resources. And so it's been a really fruitful partnership with other organizations as we're able to look at what other people are doing. And so we want to make those available as well where we can. And then one other example, there's lots more on the web page, but this last example is around the Renew training that I've done with employee teams, really around resilience, compassion fatigue, and things that are applicable both to caregivers at home as well as professional caregivers. And so through this time, we've decided to make that available to a larger audience. And so I've been working to put that into an audio format that's available as a podcast, whether it's through iTunes or other places where you find podcasts. You can also find a link on this page here. So those are just a few examples of Christian Horizons kind of unique offerings. I mean, there are others, but I just wanted to give a snapshot of that. And then we can move on to the next slide here. Cristina spoke to this as well, just the importance of plain language, the importance of creative communication through this time. We saw that that's one of the challenges, right? That there's so much coming out all the time in media and news, but how much of it is really accessible for people? How much of it really takes into consideration the different ways that people communicate? And there's such a need right now. Thankfully, there's also so many resources being produced. There's social stories and videos that are being generated. Cristina and others are generating resources around spirituality. I'm looking forward to hearing what's coming out of the Jewish tradition too, as far as that goes. But so I mean, we have some of the things that we offer, but our unique contribution, I would say, on this page is more around structuring the many resources that people have created in a way that makes sense. Because sorting through everything just using Google can be overwhelming at times. So this is a screen clip of one part of the page, just asking questions like, what's going on? How would I have that conversation with somebody who may communicate differently or creatively? What is a coronavirus? How do I protect myself? Why can't I have visitors at my home? Why are there so many new support staff coming in? What happens if I get sick? What if I need to be tested? What if someone I love dies because of the coronavirus? All these kinds of questions, just looking to organize those in a way that makes sense as we're having those conversations, as we're connecting with people. I mean, as we look at the history of intellectual and developmental disability, so often rights and choices have been limited. And so the danger, I think, at this particular moment in time is to go back to maybe a more institutional mindset to say, we need to keep people safe, right? And yes, we all need to keep safe. That's a reality. That's crucial. That's important. We also have a need for information, to feel like we have an awareness of what's going on, to feel like we're in the know a bit. And while that's happening, whether it's through social media or in different ways, we need to be really mindful of that, especially in social service kinds of settings, to make sure that we're being really cautious around that and not imposing more restrictions than need to be happening, and to be in constant communication with people around what their needs are, what their fears and anxieties are, and how we can answer some of those questions and walk through that journey together. And then just to go to the final slide here. So it's been a real delight to be with you today. I look forward to some of the questions. Just to share this one verse that's been guiding for me in terms of how do we faithfully respond to COVID-19. And this is from 2 Timothy, where it says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fearfulness, but one of power, love, and sound judgment." I don't know about you, but there are times these days where I don't feel like I have a lot of sound judgment left. But I do pray that spirit of patience, that spirit of peace, that spirit that's not of fearfulness is something that comes through both in our actions and our interactions and the resources we have to offer. So I would love to hear from you in terms of your experience, whether you have resources that you would like to see on this page, maybe some that I haven't come across. Feel free to reach out to me. My email address is there as well. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Keith. And next, here we go. Next, we'll turn it over to Shelly, and then we'll have questions at the end. So go ahead, Shelly.
Great. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, everyone, for being here today. I'm so honored to have been invited to share the perspective of the Jewish community. My presentation will be about the boots on the ground and what's happening with boots on the ground. I noticed there was a question or a comment that came up about in the chat box about accessing technology, accessing resources for that, and we'll kind of talk through that a little bit too in terms of how to approach that. But Jewish communities around the world have responded to the call to include and support people with disabilities and mental health conditions. A lot of progress has been achieved as people have access to Jewish life, to synagogues, community centers, to education, social participation, like anyone else. And I was initially concerned that COVID-19 would diminish all of these advances that have taken literally many, many years to achieve. But I realized I didn't need to worry. And so I want to share with you today just some of the ways the Jewish community is ensuring that all people with disabilities, people without disabilities, continue to feel that precious sense of belonging. And really, one of the things that has occurred to me, we always talk about how the world sees people with disabilities as the other, them, and then everybody else falls into this category of us. And the truth is, we are all us right now. And if anything, COVID-19 has sort of started to diminish some of those barriers or those obstacles in our thinking, that because we really are all in this together. What I did was speak to Jewish community professionals and communities around North America to learn how they are changing the course to meet the needs of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. First of all, Passover fell in mid-April, of course, so did Easter, and the full shutdown caused cancellations of seders and group celebrations. Passover is celebrated in our homes, and we had to find new ways to celebrate our ancestors' freedom from oppression and slavery in Egypt. Many of us hold big seders that include family from near and far, our friends. strangers to us, people we don't know, who have no place to go. And some of us struggle to find kosher for Passover food, finding matzah particularly difficult where I live. Our Seder, which is usually quite large, was very quiet. There were 3 of us, our son Jacob, my husband Rick, and I. Many people had Zoom Seders and family gatherings, and that's what we did for our second night of Passover. It was different. We had a lot of fun celebrating with our cousins and aunt and uncle from out of town. There was one complaint though, and that was there was no food to share. So that's one of the things that fell by the wayside this year. But many synagogues and agencies delivered Passover foods and ritual items to people with IDD living independently and in group homes and with their family members. Most provided instructions about how to use the items and also included information to access community seders. I want to just explain on this slide, do not separate yourself from the community, is from Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers. It is one of those phrases of wisdom that apply not just now, but for all time. The Hebrew that you see on the slide also is the Hebrew word chai, and the translation of chai is life. And I wanted to include this in this slide because I think that what we're all striving to achieve is to make sure that people are actively involved in Jewish life as they determine. So I just want to share a little bit about what synagogues are doing. We'll actually hear about a synagogue and some of the things that they're doing, but I wanted to just address the technology. And like many faith communities, most faith communities, technology is the primary and often the only way to gather congregants together, as well as meet the needs for individual pastoral care and education. The observation from the people I spoke with, for the most part, is that living with a disability is not keeping people from participating. And congregations and other organizations are finding ways to bring technology to those who don't yet have access, including helping people to use Zoom. And the, oh, yep, that's right, stay there. In an ever evolving process, changes. Everything has been, I'm going to say, converted to online things. I'm a bar and bat mitzvah tutor for my synagogue, and I do all my tutoring online now. Committee meetings, religious school classes, services. I read yesterday that attendance at services has actually grown since it's become an online phenomenon. One way a synagogue preschool reaches their children, and these are inclusive classrooms for all kids. They organized a drive-by parade. So the teachers and the staff got in individual cars and they went to each child's home and waved as they passed by. They had signs, and the kids and their parents were all standing out on the driveway. So it's, again, a very unusual way of connecting, but it's there. And there are, and this I think is really important too, congregations often have a core of volunteers who call every congregant weekly just to check in, just to see if there's anything that they need. And I think it's important because, again, finding out what people need. Are you able to access the online community? And if not, we need to figure out a way to do that. And Temple, next slide, please. Temple Rodef Shalom in Northern Virginia and Falls Church has created an online community page. The director, Anita Thornton, she's the director of Caring and Inclusion, told me that in addition to the online offerings, they set up a COVID-19 emergency fund and have raised over $50,000 to disperse to those who have lost their jobs or whose income has been affected by COVID-19, including people with disabilities, of course. The synagogue provides weekly medication and grocery delivery, so they have that chance to again, from afar, check in with people. And this, I think, is a good opportunity for all of us. The temple has been working with the community agencies, as well as other congregants, to provide smartphones, iPads, and laptops to people who don't have access to them at all, and then teaching people how to use the technology, or working with providers for teaching people how to use technology. Next slide, please. Stacy Spencer, who coordinates a program of outreach, support, and social connection for Jewish adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, spends most of her days now making virtual home visits, checking in with individuals, family members, and guardians, as well as group home support staff and other caregivers. And she said that the people she supports are doing the same as everybody else. Good days, bad days. There's tears, disappointment, there's isolation, there's loss of jobs. People are looking to grasp new normal. And virtual visits, Stacy works for Jewish Family and Children's Service of Minneapolis, which is a social service agency. And they are doing virtual visits as a necessity in people's lives. And so Stacy's visits provide comfort and consistency for the people she supports. And next slide. The Seder, a beloved annual event, is canceled. The Passover Seder is an annual event in the Twin Cities Jewish disability community, has been for over two decades, and it was canceled this year. Stacy said that the response that she had was overwhelming sadness, disappointment, and even after it was canceled, people were still trying to RSVP to go to it. So she made the decision to make the Seder happen anyway. And knowing it wouldn't be in person and it wouldn't feature the traditional Seder meal, it would bring people together to celebrate Passover. And the social connection is so, so critical. Knowing that a lot of the people that she supports are on Facebook, she decided to use Facebook Live as a platform and started a Facebook group that was more contained, so nobody from the outside could join. It was a private group, and she worked nonstop making phone calls to individuals and families and group home staff, and also sending emails with information on how to join the group so people could have access to the Seder. It's really important that people, we don't make assumptions about what people can and can't do and what kind of support they need. Stacy really devoted her energy to making sure people had the resources, the technology to be able to come to the Seder. They had a favorite song leader, and for 45 minutes, people were singing and dancing in their own homes. They were with friends, family, they were by themselves. It was a combination of things. But the thing that people reported is that they just felt part of something. And it was like a balm that soothed the loss of seeing their friends in person. At one point, you can see on the screen, there were 157 comments while the Seder was going on from people. People were saying hello to each other. They were talking about how wonderful this was. They were talking about how much they missed each other. And so the future holds many more of these events as long as it's needed. Next slide, please. The Jewish community centers are the center often of Jewish life, and most of them have gone to an online platform for classes and programs for all people who want to participate. Liv Mendelson, who's the inclusion director at the Miles Nadal JCC in downtown Toronto, has told me that all the programs are open to all people of all abilities. There's no, well, if you have a disability, you can't come to this program. People can go to whatever they choose. But they also have programming designed to meet the specific needs of people that people with disabilities and their families have identified. And so you can just see the list of programs that are now offered online. I just love this. There's a karaoke, I think that's up there, the karaoke group, and just so many different things that appeal to people's interests and their connection. There's a daily social group that meets on Zoom, and everybody I've talked to said that they are super busy making these changes. Liv said it is good busy. Next slide is the virtual Kesher, the power of connection. And this is in Calgary. Kesher means connection in Hebrew. So although we're in physical isolation, we stay connected. On March 16th, Calgary, Alberta was ordered to begin its shutdown. Karina Schultz, director of the program in Calgary, the Jewish Disabilities and Inclusion Calgary group, or she calls it the Judaica program, said that at midnight on March 17th, she woke up suddenly with a plan for how to keep people connected, to feel the sense of belonging. That's a hallmark of the work that is done in Calgary. And so exactly 1 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time on Sundays, members of the Calgary Jewish community tune into a watch party on Facebook Live, again, using Facebook Live as a platform. And Karina, you see the picture of Karina just strumming her guitar as she welcomes people coming on Facebook Live. She always has a theme, and this past Sunday she dedicated the program to the people who died in the Holocaust in commemoration of Yom HaShoah, which is a day where we mourn those whose lives were taken in the Holocaust. She tells stories, she sings songs, she shares readings from books, and this past week was a reading from the Diary of Anne Frank. So she says this, and this is important, I think, for all of us to recognize the success of what she's doing. And Stacy and Liv and Anita all will say that the success is based on engaging families and caregivers in addition to people who live with IDD. And right now, a number of people living in group homes particularly cannot be visited by their families. So what Karina has done is worked super diligently to working with the family members to ask the group home staff to get their Jewish residents online at 1 p.m. on Sundays. What's been really nice about this as people come around is that some community members who don't type are able to express their thoughts to their caregivers who are right there with them, who are able to voice their ideas. I wanted to just bring this, and then we just have one more person who we'll close with. Karina noted that she's been asked how people with IDD can use an online platform. And this is her reply to people who say that. Why are you assuming that people with IDD don't know how to connect to Facebook? Assume competency. That's the way to go. The accommodation is to tell caregivers to please make sure that the person they support is on Facebook Live at 1 o'clock every Sunday. Next slide, please. Oops, there we go. Sharon Pillay, who lives with a disability, in her own words. How I feel about staying home away from my community. It's been hard for me staying at home as I love to go. I've been home now for 35 days. Yes, it's been 35 days since I've been on Metro Mobility. Mind you, I don't miss bumming around on the bus. I sure do miss my Jewish community. I miss the JCC, where a bunch of disabled people get together every Wednesday for lunch. Then we go to the school kitchen. There we make challah for Shabbat. We give some to the school and we sell challah to the public on Fridays. Even though we can't get together now, the director of the inclusion department of the JCC found a way for us to all stay together in these times. Every Wednesday, we Zoom for an hour together. And actually, that's where Sharon is right now. Otherwise, she'd be on this one. She'd be watching this webinar. Everyone loves this as it gives us an opportunity to see and talk with each other. I do miss my synagogue. I miss going there and being with people and praying. Every chance I get, I hook up to services online and sing my heart out. And every morning and night, I pray to God to keep the world and me safe and to heal the world so we can get back to our lives. Amen, Sharon. Next slide. This is my book, From Longing to Belonging, and also my contact information. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or thoughts. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Shelly. And Thanks to all of our presenters. Now we are going to open it up for about 5 minutes or so for questions. I think we're going to do it all through chat, and we've already had a number of questions already. So how chat works is that there's a little button down at the bottom. It says chat. If you click that, if you don't already have your screen up, your chat screen up, you can, and then it will create the window and you can just type your questions in there. And I just need to find the first one. Oh, one point that Bill wanted to make sure that I made is to tell you all what a USED is. A USED is an acronym. It's Universities for Centers of Excellence for Developmental Disabilities, and there's one, at least one in every state, and we're funded by the federal government to support individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families in a lot of different ways. So thanks for that, Bill. Bill also said a favorite saying from a poster I got in college is, life is what happens while you're making other plans. Absolutely, thanks for that. See, Natalie said, hope to hear presenters address access to technology, which is a huge barrier, especially with COVID. I'm on a nonprofit in Seattle, with a nonprofit in Seattle. Many of our clients have no access at all to phone or tablet. Wondering, I think that came up during Keith's discussion, but would any of our presenters like to respond to that?
Maybe just, I know Shelly touched on that a bit already. Maybe just quickly, it's also a real opportunity, I think, for organizations like ours, where before it might have been fairly easy to make the connection with family and friends, just to go over and visit. Now it's really pushing us into, okay, that's not the easy option anymore. So how do we take those next steps with technology? How do we find out the ways that people are able to connect online? So it's both a challenge. I think, as we talked about before, that there are the communication barriers just due to access, right? So it is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us, as we're discovering so many people can connect in different ways than maybe we typically would have given them credit for, or worked through some of the challenges with them. So I think it's an exciting time for us as we explore that more. I know that on our Facebook page, we do these care point discussions every Tuesday and Thursday at 11:30 Eastern. And we've been able to just connect with people across the province of Ontario and Saskatchewan. This coming Thursday, we're connecting with some folks around the world, I think in Guatemala. So it's brought that a whole new awareness to how we can use these tools to connect with each other, which is kind of exciting.
Thanks, Keith. Shelly or Christina, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, that was one of the big questions that we had at the beginning of making all of our resources. What happens if it's somebody in a residential home or in a hospital, and they've got no access to anything? So we made the resources as downloadable PDFs, so as that they can be printed and used in the way that we would use in a classroom, but also the PDF could be put onto a tablet or used on a computer and looked at and answered, and everything's in Word as well. So a lot of the symbol images that we've made, because we're making everything on that we can in symbols. In fact, we're even posting out on Facebook in widget symbols. We've made them as JPEGs, because I suppose it's very much about, from the very beginning, thinking from the mindset of the creative learner and how we can remove barriers that will stop people from accessing and expressing their faith and asking the questions. So we've made a booklet that's got instructions of what a care provider or a spiritual leader could do, and then there's the documents that you can just copy and paste, or you can ping across Facebook, or can download from the website. I think that was one of the challenges, but we hope that we've begun to think about it. What it certainly does do is it opens up what can be made available and what can be shared amongst us as people of faith, and how spirituality can be made totally possible, expressing the spirit, and that can then flow into religious practice.
I also want to add that oftentimes service providers, you know, that there is technology on site. We can cite an example of a group home, for example, that on a kind of the boots on the ground thing is that somebody who is organizing programming or outreach can contact the provider and, you know, kind of work with them and say, this is the only contact we have for anyone, you know, for the people you support to be served, supported by the community. They have to have this technology, and, you know, it may require you know, some nudging to make sure that people are thinking, you know, these providers are thinking differently, maybe making some changes so that people can use the technology that's in existence in that space. So just another thought, and that's what I know a lot of people have been doing.
A couple of other questions that we've gotten also relate to technology. One question is, how do you persuade congregations of all faiths that they need to address inclusion in their communities when they respond that they only have one or two people and all are welcome? And this is an interesting way to do this through this new technology that we have. But then the follow-up point was, how do you handle interruptions to the internet as a result of overcrowded users?
Well, nothing's perfect. These things are going to happen. There's going to be interruptions, and I think we've all experienced those. So again, it's a modicum of patience. Here we go again. I need to get back on because I've been booted out, things like that. And I think that, you know, I think that if you're in a conversation on Zoom, for example, with someone, as a person facilitating a conversation, you might want to say, you know, we might get disconnected, we might get booted out. Let's talk about how to get back on before we're done. So, or offer alternatives like telephones and things like that. As far as helping congregations understand the necessity of inclusion, we have been dealing with this, all of us in our faith communities, for years and years and years, with a great deal of success. And I just want to put out there that it's entirely possible in a faith community. It's going to be obstacles, certainly, but I think our theology, our respective theologies, really provide a jumping off point for faith communities to understand that everyone is created equal, everyone is created in the image of God, and take it from there.
I think one of the things that struck me when we were doing our piece of research into Everybody Has a Story, we noted that there were lots of people that knew why spirituality and religious practice were important for people with intellectual, creative communicators, but they didn't know how to make the resources or how to find solutions. And then you had lots of people that knew how to make faith and spirituality accessible, but they didn't really know why spirituality and religious practice was important. So like in the special schools and in professional fields, I think we've lived through the last 20, 30 years has been an absolute revolution in creative communication. And that's why I think we need to get together. I think COVID has given us not just a reason to get together, but I think it's pulled us together, because if we don't do something, then the danger is that the very people that we have sought to shield during COVID becomes double victim of maybe eugenic concept of their frailty rather than understanding their value. So I think begin from value and find solutions together. I think that was a great answer, Shelley. Just find solutions. What we can't do, we'll find out how to do. Everything's possible.
And we are over time a little bit, so I do want to be mindful of everybody's time. So there are a number of questions and comments and answers to those questions in the chat if you want to take a look at those, and I'll stay on for a little bit as well if anybody has additional questions. But I do want to thank, first of all, our speakers for a really great series of talks, and thanks to all of our attendees as well for joining us for this very important topic. one other quick announcement is that our next session of these webinars will be May 27th, entitled Places of Belonging, Using Our Heads, Hearts, and Hands to Overcome Social Divisions. And Amy Julia Becker will be the presenter there. So thank you to everyone again. Other news, Bill, did you want to mention this one?
Well, most people who know about the Institute on Theology and Disability know that it's been canceled for this year because of COVID-19. But the website has got lots of videos from the plenary videos from past institutes. And there's a wealth of them really now from about 8 to 10 years, and lots of good resources there. One last year that Shelly, Christensen, and Barbara Newman did together as a conversation about how to help inclusion happen in a faith community, which was kind of really creative. And then the Institute's Facebook page, we continue to put out resources and training opportunities and new things that are happening, and also COVID-19 resources that we think are applicable to faith communities. So if you'd like to find that Facebook page and like us, and you'll get those resources.
Great. And then, as always, our website, faithanddisability.org, we will be posting this session, this recorded session, as well as the slides there as soon as we can get that to Eric Carter. So thank you again, everybody, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Stay safe and well, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.